to submit questions to me as the interviewer and also to Edna, our guest today on Rising Tide. If you have anything you'd like us to clarify or that you'd like to ask Edna, please go ahead and drop those in the Q&A section. We'll endeavor to answer them in line. And if we have some extra time, we'll take some questions at the end. Today's theme, we are looking to tap Edna's many years of wisdom and knowledge, and we would really love to focus on some of the more trailblazing aspects of her career. So before Edna comes on camera, I just want to properly embarrass her by reading some parts of her storied career, which I think will provide some context for today's conversation. Edna, for those of you who don't know her, is a restaurant industry veteran whose experience spans across numerous brands in the industry. She was the president of Red Lobster, Blue Coral, Wild Wing Cafe, the James Beard Foundation, and a CEO and partner of the Range Restaurant Group. She's a board member on multiple public and private boards, and culminating in being the chairperson of a Fortune 300 brand, Tractor Supply. She's a past member of other boards, including Cozy, Einstein Noah, P.F. Chang's, Wild Wing Cafe, Backyard Burger, and now Full Course. In these roles, she's brought a unique ability to blend and balance markets, financial needs, and organizational culture into sustainable long-term business success. She's also an advisor to several early-stage companies like Bite Kitchen, Luther Dryer's Lemonade, and Top Sales Steamers. She's served also on the board of trustees for the Culinary Institute of America. But what I really love about Edna is she always keeps it real. You get a full aspect of her personality in the way that she leads. She has a very go for it and tenacious attitude. She's always willing to put herself out there and understand her worth, which makes her a trailblazer in the field and a pioneer in the restaurant industry as one of our legendary female leaders. I am super proud of the work she's done in helping stand up and as the first president of Women's Food Service Forum, which now has a whopping 9,000 members in it. So part of Edna's role in our industry has been to shape the future of what we are doing as leaders in the industry. So today's questions are going to focus largely on the elements of a trailblazer and how we can exemplify some of these great lessons from Edna's career as we even go forth in the restaurant industry and affect change. We think trailblazers all have three things in common. The first is an ability to spot a cultural pivot, really understand it, and what the roots of that are. I think the second thing is they embody some really timeless characteristics and behaviors that we know we need in our leaders, especially in this industry. And three, I think they're always growing and emerging as, leaders themselves, right? They're out there really sharpening and honing their own skills through mentorship, education, and training, even when they are, technically in retirement. And so I want to sit down with Edna. And Edna, if you don't mind joining us on stage, if you will, let's get that camera. There she is. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll get you off mute too, so we can hear you.
Happy to be here, Lauren. Thank you.
There you are. It's so great to have you today. I'm just so pleased that we are able to showcase not just your incredible experience and just all of your wisdom, because I feel like we at Full Course benefit from that on the regular, but really wanted to use today to talk about this theme of trailblazing, because you've certainly done so much of that in your career. So I want to focus first on some of the cultural aspects that, like, being a trailblazer really means you have to see the road ahead of you and understand where we're headed or need to go as an industry. What are some really significant cultural shifts that you've identified as a leader in the restaurant industry? And can you give us some examples of where you saw that cultural pivot coming and you needed to respond as a leader?
Sure. And again, Lauren, thank you for having me. I'm so pleased to be affiliated with Full Course and to be able to have this time to talk to you and talk to the audience about whatever they would like to talk about. I think before I talk about some of the cultural shifts that may have led to some things, it's important that we understand what informs us, right? I got out of college in 1974, That happened to be the first year women could have a checking account without their husband's signature, or a man's signature, father, husband, someone. And I also had a grandmother who taught African-American children and adults to read, because in the small town in North Carolina where I grew up, at the time she was young, before I was there were no schools for African-Americans. And so I think I also had two wonderful parents who, they didn't talk about equity and equality all the time. They did not talk about it. They did talk about respect. They talked about fairness. They talked about working for what you want and how people are treated. So I think my background clearly informed a sense of fairness. And in preparation for this call, as I looked back through other times over the long time I've been in the industry, as I talked to different groups, the one consistent theme was around fairness and respect. And that's going to get into the other things we talk about leadership and so forth. But I think one, and you mentioned it in the nice introduction, thank you for that, but Women's Food Service Forum was not something I spotted, but I received a call from Restaurant Business, one of the publications that we still read and stay informed with. They wanted to do an interview with women in the industry. And this was early, I guess, mid to late 80s. And I said, sure, I'm a woman, I'm in the industry, happy to do that. And so they're like, can you find some other women that are in senior positions? At the time, I was SVP of HR at Hardee's Food Systems, fast food company that was based in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And so I went to work because I did not know other women in senior positions in our industry. And we cobbled together, and we did go out of the specific restaurant industry. We went into hotels, we went into educational F&B, but to gather a group of women to do an all-day interview connected with the National Restaurant Show that talked about being a woman in the industry. What I think the group recognized during that day was, you know, what we had in common was we wanted to make our careers in this industry. We loved it, and we wanted a fair shot. And at the time, there were one or two women in executive positions, but we didn't see it as proof that that would happen. So it came not from a negative place, but from a good place. And the business connection was we were all, just as we are now, even more so, fighting for talent. And so how could we ignore half the population, right, if we're in a war for talent? And so we had an interview all day, and then we put a postage paid postcard in Restaurant Business and said, if you're interested in being part of this, we're going to meet again next year during the NRA. And so that is how it started. But the cultural shift was a well, I don't know if a willingness, but at least being able to have the conversation about, hey, what do we need to do so women are attracted to our industry? They come in our industry, they use the talent that they have and thrive in our industry. So it came from a positive place. There was skepticism for sure around what we were doing. And we would be asked about, sorry.
Oh, I think we just lost Edna. Stand by. There she is.
We would have, you know, we get questions from people, perhaps our bosses, perhaps others, about what are you doing in this meeting? And are you male bashing? Doing, and it wasn't any of that. And we were finding our way. We were finding our way. We knew we were onto something. We weren't sure what. But the cultural shift was around, there were more women going to college, graduating from college, graduating from law school, and that's only continued to increase. And you combine that with the need for talent. And so that came together at a good time. And it was small. And now, as you mentioned, 9,000 members because of the people, the companies that have been involved, and really grown it into something that is making a difference, research-based, data-based, as well as the human part of finding the support and shared experiences that is so important. And it's women and men.
You know, and it's so fascinating because, you know, in my own career, having jumped from legal to restaurant ownership as a franchisee and now being on the finance side, I've had my share of, how industries have handled this differently when there's scarcity of spots for
Right.
women or
Hmm.
underrepresented talent, of color, immigrants, whomever. And what a novel moment to just like look back to the 80s when there maybe you could count the number of women in leadership on two hands.
Right.
Say,
Right.
you know what? We're not going to compete against each other. We're going to share our experiences and become more strengthened, if you will, by our communal desire to create more space for women, which I think is sometimes a little counterintuitive. And you definitely see this in finance. There are women who want to support other women and minorities who support other minorities in finance and in investment, but we're still in those early stages. And I find myself needing to do exactly the same thing, to tap other women on the shoulder and say, hey, can we go have dinner and talk about it? No agenda. Just can we make our lives easier? Can we talk about what's going on right now? Because I think there's sometimes a tendency when you feel like you're on the island that you've got to kind of figure it all out by yourself. But what really is powerful is putting all of those people who feel like they're on an island together and saying, hey, let's build a raft. And now the raft is huge in the restaurant industry, right?
Mhm.
That's the impact of just those small sparks of resilience and optimism. And I think having a pragmatic nature the way I know you do, just to say we got to get this done, we got to figure this out, and look at the snowball effect of that over time. It's really extraordinary.
It really is. And, Oprah showed us, right, that we all benefit from sharing experiences, sharing learnings, not that they're all the same, but you have a safe space. And that's not just with women. I mean, as I think about mentors in my first probably 20 years, most of them were men because there weren't many women around. And so I think when you talked about women supporting women, and it to me goes to a broader issue around how do we view the world, abundance or scarcity, right? There's enough to go around. I mean, we know, look at all the challenges in the restaurant industry that exist. And so we know there are enough places for people to shine, to use what they have towards results, towards the right kind of companies that people want to work for. And I think that's something we have to be willing to talk about too, because I did not experience it growing up in the industry of feeling like I wasn't supported by women, but there just weren't a whole lot. I did have a woman on a board that was supportive to me when I was at Hardee's, for example. And Women's Food Service Forum also played a very real role for me during that time, because when I went, and they've always had unbelievable speakers. And so it was, getting that battery charged and getting ready to go back out and do good, knowing that the first thing is to earn your right to innovate and do different things by getting the results, because that's something, that we also talked about. We can't forget that. There may be a lot of things we want to do, but we have to earn that ability to make change in our organizations.
Yeah, it's table stakes, isn't it? You got
Yep.
to show up, be
Yep.
prepared, and earn your stripes, before
Absolutely.
you can even have the luxury of standing up and saying, could we do this better? Could
Yep.
we be better? How could
Right.
we be better? Because I think that's where your validity comes from. It's not just the fact that you're a woman and you're different. It's you're a minority and you're different, right? Those things do matter, but it's the fact that you've checked the box literally on your ability to rise to the level of talent that, I think gets you there. It's an interesting thing to think about, kind of seizing on these cultural moments, because as you're even sitting here and describing your journey as a female leader in the restaurant industry, I see brands going through this evolution too, right? Where I see trends overwhelmingly from Gen X down to Alpha starting to align themselves very early. I mean, for us, it's even as young as our 13-year-old identifying with brands that that resonate with them personally,
Right.
that they understand a certain sense of purpose and mission and what the brand is about.
Mhm.
How do you, as someone who's led, in executive roles and in board seats, so many different brands in this space, how do you see brands being able to navigate and tread in these very sometimes dangerous waters of following cultural trends and seeing the road ahead. What are some things that you've observed, good, bad, and ugly?
I think it may sound worn out, but getting back to why you started in the first place as a brand, what was your purpose? What was your mission? What are you trying to do? Because we all have seen it, right? We drift away from it. Hardee's was known many, many years ago when I was there as, the flame broiled burgers. And then a renegade franchisee went off and did biscuits, and that became a third of our business. I mean, it was like, so we were known for our biscuits. We were known for the flame broiled. Then we began to drift and try to do some healthy things and try to do way too many things to be able to execute instead of focusing on what we were about. You always have to update, but it's about staying on top of trends without giving up who you are, unless who you are doesn't work anymore. And then you have a whole different issue, right? But I think that with the younger folks who really, they care about authenticity. So it's even more important than ever that whoever it is in the company can speak with authority and authenticity about what is it we stand for, both as a business, but also our values. I mean, you have Full Course has their values prominently on display, and I imagine prominently within the company, right? And so I think the younger folks, I think we've always, all of us, it's like, well, okay, I hear what you say, I see what you have on the wall, but how do you behave? What do you do? How are you operating your business? How are you treating your teams? How are you developing teams and so forth? So it's what we do. And I think that those who do not do that do so at their own risk, because it's just, people can spot fake. They can just spot it. And I think authenticity has always been important, but even more so now, because I think one of the major shifts has been the internet, social media, all of those things. And so getting to the truth, getting to what's real can be even more challenging. So you better be really, really clear as a brand, and your team needs to believe it and feel it. And that's based on how they are treated inside every day. So
Edna, do you think, I'm going to just sort of, in my brain, this is a Venn diagram, so roll with me on this. Do you think that that authenticity is at the intersection of really truly integrating diversity into your team and into the brand, so that those messages, when they're communicated out to the consumer, genuinely have that resonance, because the way that the team looks matches the way the consumer base looks, right? Is that a necessary component, rather than just us thinking about diversity as a check of the box? Like, it actually has a deeper purpose in presenting that authenticity.
right. I think it is just good business practice to have your team, your workforce reflect the communities you serve. And and Hardee's was not alone in this. People talked about that back in the 80s. And so it was like, okay, that makes sense, right? Because then we better understand what happened was the diversity that comes. If you're going to staff restaurants, if you're going to staff support centers, you're going to have diversity, but can we operate in an inclusive way where those with a different perspective have a voice? Because in the 80s and the 90s, sometimes those different perspectives that you needed were not in a role or in a position where their voices could be heard. And so how do you do that? Whether it is by having a diverse workforce at all levels, whether it is just how you operate as a business and the methods you have for making sure ideas bubble up as opposed to get squelched or never heard. So it's a good business practice, and inclusion is just a business imperative. What did people used to say? Diversity is getting invited to the dance, but inclusion is dancing, or something like that. I don't know, but you can have diversity and not get the benefit of it, right? And
Yes. Yeah.
so yeah.
We just were talking about this weekend at Prosper, when and the way they put it was, diversity is everyone is invited to the party. Inclusion is making sure everybody gets to dance, right? And so it's just not it's so much more than just making sure that you've got all the seats at the table stacked with the right talent and those right points of view that are informed from diversity, whether it's women, minorities, immigrants, veterans, single parents, doesn't matter. It's that they're at the table and their voices are being heard. And I think that's an excellent point, because you could have the diversity, right? But if it's not sitting around your boardroom, if it's not sitting in your executive meetings, does it really count? And if it's not there, then what are you doing to pull those voices up and hear those points of view from all over the organization? Because I think you hit on this a second ago, and I want to underline this. People smell fake. And there's so much of that heightened, right, presentation for social media in this very highly digitized age, that I think the generations that are even coming after us are sensitized to that in a very deep way. They can sense it in ways that we may not even have noticed initially, right? They have a better filter for it. And so I see these brands shooting out of the gate who just get it right. And when they get it right, it's because the tone is there, the brand promise is there, and they deliver just over and over and over again. And it's not hard for them because it's genuinely authentic. It's built into everything that they do. Easier said than done, right? So, I think that it fundamentally becomes a values play, if I can put it that way, which I want to sort of pivot now and talk about some of those, what I would call timeless characteristics of really trailblazing leaders. Because I think that there's a lot of lip service given to this, but one of the things I really love and admire about you and your career is you didn't ever stop. I mean, you were breaking glass ceilings and you're kind of like, where's the next layer? Let's go, right? And you're still doing it. And there's a level of sort of fearless tenacity about that just is so refreshingly honest. You say the things. So I want to have a really good conversation here about when it gets down to brass tacks. Like, what are the things that these trailblazing leaders that you see when you identify them out there? What are they doing? What are they living that's different? So we know when to spot it and maybe elevate it faster.
Okay, and there are quite a few, but I'm going to start, since you talked about sometimes you have to say the thing, whatever the thing is. And I'll do it by way of examples. And some of them are from very early in my career, but over time they have stayed with me, and they apply to much broader systemic things, but they started with individual examples. Courage to me, courage to speak up, courage to say what needs to be said, courage to have a different viewpoint. So it starts, I think, with courage, because if you sit with all the good ideas, Wendy Davidson, who's a CEO at Hain Celestial, she's always about, you're at the table for a reason. So bring your perspective, but that's not always easy. I remember being the personnel manager in the manufacturing division of Hardee's. We had 3 manufacturing plants. Sanitation supervisor was extremely important because that kept the food safe. It was done on 3rd shift. The gentleman, we'll call him Julius, who was the sanitation supervisor. The plant manager, who was extremely gruff, and I was like 28, I don't know, but he calls me over and says, you got to have termination papers drawn up in the morning. We're firing Julius. And I'm go, what? And he goes, the plant's been dirty the past 2 nights. I'm like, why? He goes, I don't know. I didn't take him to raise. He said he's not doing his job. That's it. What I knew in my role was that Julius was wonderful, A. B, it was an extremely hard job to fill. And he'd been with us about 3 years, and he was excellent. His team followed him and he held them accountable. So I came in that night on 3rd shift, and I'm like, Julius, the plant's not clean. And he goes, I know. And he wouldn't give me eye contact. And I'm like, why not? He goes, we changed products. And I'm like, okay. Now there's another question. How come he wasn't involved in that? But whatever. And so then I'm like, and he goes, the instructions, I don't know how to use it. I don't know how to mix it. I don't know how to do it. And I said, Julius, why? And he went, I can't read. So the next morning, I said, we'll go to Edgecombe Community College this week and enroll in classes for reading. And so the next morning I went to see Dan, and he said, "Where are the papers?" I said, "I didn't do them." And I told him the story, and I will tell you that it did not move him like it still moves me to this day. But it was about having the courage to say it, the ability to hear what he had to say, and then to do something about it. And he retired years later. We kept him in that position, and our plants never had any sort of sanitation or health issues. And it was such a small thing, but it's like, wow, this was good. And Dan grudgingly eventually said this was a good thing we didn't fire him. But it's so I was young, Dan was gruff, I was the only female officer, and you always think, or at that time I thought, anything I screw up, I'll screw it up for all women, which is a terrible feeling to have, right? I can't screw
It is.
but I felt that pressure early on. And so I think having the courage to speak up, you must have that, otherwise nothing changes. And I think back to the woman I mentioned who was on the Hardee's board in the 80s, and that was certainly different. But she said to me, "You've just got to keep speaking up. They're not used to hearing women's voices." And she didn't mean sit there and chatter all the time, but she just meant state what you need to state. And she was so encouraging. And so to all of us, I would say, you never know how you're going to impact someone. She helped me, and she knew that she helped me. And I also remember she was Canadian, and she drove to Florida every year because she didn't fly. And I said, "Would you stop and have wine and cheese at my house with the women of Hardee's?" And so she did. And there were 10 of us, and it was so informal and no agenda, but it was just the encouragement to use your talents, use your gifts towards the business. So courage would be a huge one. I think another one is, so you don't get off track, and you're still going to get off track, but know who you are, know your North Star, know thyself, right? That is one of the most important things. I don't know how we function if we don't do that. And we get clearer over time for sure. And mine has always been informed by respect and fairness and other things, but those two just they stand out. And I think about and this is, some of these are sort of sad, but I'm going to use them because they are examples that I think matter. At a company where I worked, someone was at our bar. He was a restaurant employee at a different company, but was at the bar, had a few drinks, and then had an accident and died. And his parents wanted to meet with me. I was president of the concept. And the attorneys were like, "You cannot meet with them." But there was one attorney in our legal department who said, "I will go with you," because this was their only child. The legal system was going to determine liability because he had been to several restaurants. And I thought, out of dignity and respect and fairness, we should sit down with them. And we did. The attorney went with me, and they said, "We brought our book of pictures. We'd like you to look at them." And we did. And we, I think, there was no good solution, but we did even more increased training, development, awareness, and it was as good as the situation could have come out for resolution for the company. But again, it was because there was an attorney willing to go with me to make sure I did not do something I shouldn't, but that also understood this is a human situation, and we are the restaurant industry, we are a hospitality industry, and it is about taking care of people. And so I think, in addition to knowing what matters to you and having courage, I mean, those are two things that a trailblazer, because that's about plowing new ground perhaps, or doing something in a way that it hasn't been done, if you think about what is trailblazing. So we must have courage, we must know ourselves. We've already mentioned earning the right to bring things up, propose different changes. I think this is a practical tip, but I think learning to say, this is just a test. It's not a whole new program. It's not a huge precedent. It's a test. And when I was at a company called Advantica that owned 9 restaurant companies, including Denny's at the time, we had a wonderful woman in marketing. She was single. She wanted to adopt a child. She had exhausted all avenues in the United States. She came to my office one day and said, I received a call from Romania. There's a possibility that I can adopt a child, but I have to be there 6 weeks. Of course, I'm going to need my job more than ever if I come home. I knew she was an outstanding team member, and we had just partnered as an international philanthropy with Save the Children. And so I'm like, I think we can probably do that. So I went and talked to her boss, and he said, well, what about precedent? And I said, it's just a test. We're going to see how it works. It kind of fits with Save the Children, right? Improving the lives of children all over the world. What better example of this than someone being adopted by this wonderful person that works with us, right? And having a very full life. And so it happened, right? And we went into more systemic approaches after that and put in adoption policies before they were the norm. We put in leave policies before they were mandated or the norm. But it started with using it as a test. And again, it's a tactic, but boy, has it worked over the years. We're just going to test this and see how it happens. Another thing I think that helps a trailblazer to plow new ground is to also, when you're talking to somebody whose approval you need for something to move forward, whenever you can, to say, you don't have to answer right now. In fact, don't. Think about it. I just want to share this with you and let you noodle on it, think about it, have time, because then people don't feel backed in a corner and perhaps feel the need to focus only on the reasons not to do something. So those are a couple of practical, I think, skills or competencies that I believe can help. I also think trailblazers, and this is huge, need to cross boundaries. I think we need to talk with people who are different from ourselves, listen to people who are different from ourselves, work with people who are different from ourselves, and learn and ask questions and read. And, I think about, what's it called? Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates. That's fascinating to watch. It just exposes you to a whole different world of people and their backgrounds. And some of us get to know our ancestry easier than others get to know it, right? Because of certain things. But it's like those sorts of things, crossing boundaries broadens your world. I mean, it absolutely broadens your world. I was with Denny's at the time that there was terrible racial discrimination. I joined and I got called to a confidential meeting a week later and was told about it. There was no social media. It was in Newsweek about 2 weeks later, and then things exploded. But I remember, I had a choice, stay or leave, and I chose to stay and try to work with all of us to make us a stronger company and being an inclusive place. And I think we did an excellent job, although it was very tough for a long time. I remember walking with Ben Chavis, who was head of the NAACP at the time and the CEO of Advantica at the time, after a wonderful dinner in New York, after we were all feeling good because of years of work on things that were positive and were good and that made us inclusive, more effective, and a good place to be. And Ben Chavis said, I've enjoyed our conversations tonight, and you are without a doubt what did he call me? There was a name, and I'll think of it in a minute. I didn't know what it meant. And I went home and called Norm Hill, in case anybody knows him, who's African-American. He was on my team. And I said, I know you don't speak for all African-Americans, but I just need to know what this is. I mean, did he compliment me or did he insult me? And he said he complimented you. So that was good, but it's like having the trust and the relationship with people who are different from yourself so you can learn. And that was sort of a small thing, but it's helped me over the years because people are willing to share with me experiences, perspectives that otherwise I would not have. So I think that crossing and boundary might not be the right word, but he called me a homegirl is what it was, homegirl. And I just think that way we get to know each other. I think prejudice comes from separateness. And, whether it's intentional or not, it's like, how are we going to know each other if we don't know each other? And it starts with conversations, and that leads to understanding, and understanding can lead to change. And I believe that in my deepest part of me. And I think that people that want to really blaze new trails, try new things, you can't stay in your own little bubble, right?
Mm-hmm. What I hear from you, just woven through all these characteristics, is just a relentless curiosity for people and what makes them tick and what colors their point of view, but also a deep level of empathy and kindness. And I just find that that might be it, Edna. I mean, you are all the things, and you've been a very successful leader and still are in your career. And underscoring all of those characteristics, I think, is a deep curiosity for people in an industry that is about people, right? And having a level of empathy and understanding when you do find out about them. And that story that you just shared about the floor manager who couldn't read and it was impacting his ability to do his job, just that is it, my friend. I mean, it was just being able to ask the question and be curious and then solve for it with him and do it in a way that was uplifting and supporting, not denigrating, and creating more difference. And I think if you take the time to think about it, you find common ground with almost anybody that you talk to. There's this beautiful ad, and it's actually was put on by Heineken, and they put a room together of the most disparate and different looking people you could ever imagine, and then proceeded to ask them to step into the middle of the room if they could answer the question with yes, and just ask them question after question, which football team they supported, if they were an oldest child, right? You know, just if they had children, and just watching the questions get more and more interesting and complex and seeing how they kept stepping into center was such a powerful visual reminder that we're so much more connected than we think, right? And I think as leaders in the restaurant industry, you know, I want to highlight that kindness, that empathy, that curiosity that just was so through everything that you were just saying in your examples. We have an enormous ability to impact lives. And it's not just through the customers that we serve every day, you know, in one of the largest industries in the US, but it's also one of the largest employers, you know, and it's how we bring people up underneath our wing, behind us when we're building bridges. And I think what I'd love to ask you about is mentorship has been a massive part of your career. Whether we start with just sort of the example of Women's Food Service Forum, but there's plenty of other examples. How has that really impacted you? You've already mentioned a couple mentors that you've had, but how do you view your obligation to pay it forward and in mentorship, even as you sit here now on this webinar with us today? What are some thoughts you have about how we can all turn around and be better mentors in the industry?
I think first of all, when you talk about this industry filled with so many different kinds of people, that is what I ended up here because that's where a job was, right? When I moved to Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and Hardee's was there, but I stayed here because I love it. And I love the diversity of people. And I love that in this industry, someone in the right environment, someone with smarts and get on with it and get things done. And I'm going to continue to learn. There is limitless opportunity in this space and in this industry. So that is what has always kept me here. And I've been the beneficiary of people willing to share their stories with me, share knowledge with me, give me straightforward feedback. And I think I had to grow up a little and learn to accept feedback. And this relates to mentoring, because feedback is part of mentoring. But, you know, once, again, I was the only woman officer in this setting. And the CEO said, Edna, you're the most prepared person in our meetings. I'm like, thanks, right? Way to go. I'm always prepared. And he goes, and then you just blow it at the end. And I'm like, what? And he goes, after you either present what you're presenting for approval or for information or for collaboration or whatever, you're on it and you're strong and you're clear. And then you look around the room like a bobblehead and go, okay. And I went, I do not do that. So he said, okay, fine. I think you do. So the next time I'm in a meeting, right, I'm presenting, and then just at the end, I was getting ready to do it. So that was a call to me to say, you might need to start listening a little more to people. And then I left the industry for 6 years and worked with Cummins Engine Company and had a fabulous boss. And after he had given me my annual review and it was glowing, and then he said, you know, a little bit of feedback. He said, as you go higher and higher, the implications of decisions are bigger and bigger, both good and bad. And in your zeal to get on with things, because I have always thought that was a strength, right? I can get stuff done. I can get a lot of input, process it, kind of simplify it, and then we can move on, make a decision and move on. And he said, you just need to slow down and consider, make sure you've considered enough options before you jump to a conclusion. And I was like, well, I don't know if we get anything done if I didn't move on with things. And he's like, well, no. It's just remember it. So I came back the next day and I said, Bob, I apologize. That was excellent feedback. And it's been excellent for the 30 years since he gave it to me. But those two, I would say, are examples. And it was meaningful feedback, but it was also, I didn't welcome it. And so, with feedback, we choose what we use or don't use, but we must be open to it from people we respect. And that's helped me a lot. So through formal feedback, I've gotten help, but the bigger help for me has been people that are willing to just listen to me and help me sort through things. When I moved from head of HR to president of Quincy's, which was a family steakhouse chain, and all of a sudden we had $12 million of capital, and you have people saying we got to change the menu, we got to change the facility, we got to change, and the 12 million doesn't go that far when you've got 200 restaurants. And just being able to talk to people behind closed doors and say, help me think about this, to people who had been doing this sort of work for years, and not have them laugh, at least not openly to me, but really help me think through questioning. And so I look back and I know that I have worked hard for everything that I've been able to do, but I would only have been able to do it because of people that shared things with me, whether they were inside the company or not. Plus, I love sharing with people so that if there is a gem of something that works for them, it can be helpful. Part of what I love about this stage of my life is having time to spend time with people who are at different stages of their careers or different stages of their company development. And again, never assuming that what I did would work for them, because we're all individual, but having the kind of conversation about what they might want to think about and asking them questions, because often the answers are within us and we're so in the weeds, we don't have time to really think about it. So it's both sharing my experiences in case it is helpful or in case they can take something, but also asking questions so they can listen to themselves say it out loud. Because again, often the answers are there. I think it's one of the biggest things that we can all do, and we can do it right now, is pay it forward. I also think to be open that we can learn from anyone, wherever they sit in the organization. I am a huge believer that the people closest to the work have outstanding solutions, but you've got to hear them, and you've got to have an environment where somebody can hear them and make sure it gets to the right place or is considered right and so forth. So, I've heard it might be Yum that talks about reverse mentoring. I'm sure, there's a name for it, but it is about learning wherever you can learn. And people throughout the organization have taught, organizations I've been in have taught me forever. And when I went to the James Beard Foundation, which is a not-for-profit, and it's around food and beverage, their president had admitted to embezzling and gone to jail. And I had the opportunity to go run it for a couple of years. And I thought this was a good start to leadership, was to have the staff come together on my very first day. And I said, I'm going to leave the room. You can write down any questions. And they went, we're New Yorkers. You don't have to leave the room. We'll say whatever we want in front of you. And I'm like, thanks so much. I'm going to leave the room anyway. So they had a whole bunch of questions. So I came and we had a great conversation. And at the end, someone who was not thrilled that someone from a chain restaurant had been asked to come in to lead the James Beard Foundation said, so what can somebody from Red, he could hardly say it, Lobster, do for us? And again, this was the courage and clarity, I think. And I said, without an ugly tone, but I said, you know what, Mitchell? I said, you need me or someone like me. I will never know what you all know about food, about chefs, about events, but I know some things you don't and that you need. And so we can either do this together and give us a shot at continuing on in the future and making the impact we believe this mission-driven group can do, or not. And we became fast friends after that, and did some fabulous things together as a group up there. But it is about knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know, being willing to learn. And I learned so much there, but we also put things in place that just anyone on this call would probably say, well, that was kind of obvious. They needed a few checks and balances in there and means of raising issues and so forth. But anyway, I would say I continue to learn in any role that I'm in. So you don't ever stop, whether that's through reading, talking to people, speaking, listening, whatever it is.
Let's dial in on that. So much education is available now. This advent of digital access, it's just a phenomenal time to be a person who's hungry for knowledge. What are some recommendations, suggestions that you have for anyone who's in the industry at any level, who's looking to continually improve and be a constant learner? Books, podcasts, whatever. What are some of your things that you love?
There's some I've been reading for the entire time I've been in the industry. Nation's Restaurant News. I read that religiously. Restaurant Business, FSR, QSR. So that if those four kind of, get the huge gamut, because I'm an owner in a couple of restaurants in upstate South Carolina. I also read Restaurant Owner, which is for smaller entrepreneurial type things. I read anything Jonathan Mays writes. He writes about financial goings on in the industry. Websites, I read the WFF website. I read Full Course. I read KWP newsletter, which is about founders. There's a woman on LinkedIn called Jen McMillan. She teaches a course on proper use of LinkedIn. Not that I've applied her learnings, but she just has really good things around loyalty programs. LinkedIn, her LinkedIn is something good to read. Because I'm in the retail world as well with Tractor Supply, I read Chain Store Age, Retail Dive. So I read those two things. And when you think about changes in the industry, there's such a blurring, isn't there, of retail and restaurants. And, now what did I hear the other day? Grocerants. It's groceries and restaurants, and more people dining at groceries or 7-Elevens because they have more options now. And so I don't read all the things around all those sectors, but I think you can't go wrong. I also think I read the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, not cover to cover, but these are things I think really help keep you abreast of the world. Fast Company. I read anything McKinsey has on leadership, and I listen to or read transcripts of earnings calls to just hear what people are saying about what they're working on in their publicly traded restaurants. And then CNBC from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Those earning calls are actually super fascinating and are open to the public. And if you're ever looking for a good synthesis of how these very large restaurant groups that are publicly traded are viewing trends, are responding to trends, you can usually find those nuggets in their SEC reporting and their earnings calls to their shareholders. And Bloomberg actually does a really good job. Mike Halen does a newsletter on them, and his podcast also is really good as well. That's a great list. I put up a post on LinkedIn recently, like, here's the stuff I read. What do you guys read? And I'm going to go add a few to my list, because I do think there's some thought leadership that comes from outside the restaurant industry, from McKinsey and some other big consulting firms, where I love that I hear the points of view that I know exist in like consumer packaged goods, manufacturing, supply chain. There's some basic principles there, especially because it comes down to protecting profit margin, that can easily be applied into the back of house in a kitchen. So while I don't read all of those every single day, they are in my monthly reads folder. Well, I'll go back once a month when I have time, or if I'm sitting on a plane or something, and just sort of catch up on some of those other parallel or adjacent or near adjacent industries, because I think there's a lot of learnings there too. I think that's an excellent point. But I love your hack on the earnings calls. That's a gem. I want to talk a little bit. You've in your career had a number of really pivotal moments where you've been the leader, you've been the person in the seat who's had to go through the transformation and really blaze that new trail. Can you talk about some of your key principles of leadership when you're in that deep moment? You're in the trenches, you are in it, and you need to get everyone kind of marching in the right direction. those are tough and high pressured situations. Any advice or thoughts on leadership in those particular instances, or some examples you want to share?
I think sometimes when you're in those trenches, either because of time or concern, if you're a public company or whatever, there might be a tendency not to communicate as much. And that's the time you need to communicate more and be open and clear. And when the board at, what was it, Vantica, was going to sell everything except Denny's, and I was head of Quincy's, and they had had a series of CEOs and over the years, and so it had been start stop on various directions. But so I was going to, we had a GM conference coming up, and so I was going to talk to them about the fact that we'd worked together 2 years and that the company was taking a path and that we were going to be up for sale, and that I would keep them informed. We were not public then, so we could, but our CFO was like, you can't, you'll lose everybody. Nobody will be running the restaurants. And I said, they're grown-ups, they're adults, and they have been good to us with all the change. I mean, really. And I believe for the most part, they will stay. And we lost a few, but it was about being open. And it was a very tough time for the whole industry, the companies within it, but it was the willingness to stand up and to also be able to say, it's not always a bad thing to be sold, right? And mean it, because sometimes it isn't. And I would give a few examples of where it had worked out well, because perhaps a concept was able to have more capital invested once they weren't a small concept in a big multi-concept group. But I think, I still remember the letters I got after that where people said, I will stay till the end because now I know. And there were a lot of things, but I think the communication, clear, adult-like. I think about, this was at Hardee's headquarters years ago, and I was head of HR at the time, but it was, we knew we were going to have to do layoffs at the support center. And so I said to our senior team, of which I was a part, let's let people choose. Let's have a package and let people choose. Oh no, Edna, we get paid the big bucks so we can make these tough decisions. And it wasn't about, and I said it wasn't about a tough decision. It was about adults. And what was the risk, except losing people you didn't want to lose, and shame on us if we did. But anyway, we did lose one or two, but people made their own choices. Some people may have been thinking about leaving. So I think where you can, let adults make their own decisions, but you have to have a very open dialogue, be honest about why you're doing it and so forth. And we had people who were laid off by their own choice, but they were on the local and regional television station saying this was the fairest thing that ever happened. I don't mean everyone was thrilled, but it went as well as those terrible things could, so that we could get back to work and trying to figure out how to avoid layoffs in the future by being very successful and focused as a company. So I think in those moments, you have to breathe, you have to pause and think about, how do I communicate clearly and timely? You have to pause, you have to get clear about, what am I really trying to do here? What are we really trying to do here? And have a clear plan. And that brings me to another thing we all need as trailblazers, as just people. Know, this is part of knowing yourself, but know what stills your heart. Know what calms you, which I think is very hard when you're in that. And it could be your faith, it could be massage, it could be meditation, it can be your partner in life, it can be your friends, but know what it is and find ways to squeak that in. It's needed more than ever during those times to help you think clearly, to have the courage of your convictions during that time.
Mm-hmm. I think, just even for me, being able to reframe the challenge as an opportunity. I mean, you give yourself that minute of panic and overwhelm. And I think so many of us, whether you're an operator or you're in the industry in any capacity, we have been through a lot in the last 4+ years. And so just remembering that you have those kinds of techniques to go back to, like you said, like whatever it is that works for you personally, probably will always work for you professionally as well. So I love a good reframe, right? Like, how can we reframe this in gratitude for me, like, I don't know what you do, but for me, like, I sometimes I need to wake up in the morning and just start my day with a gratitude meditation so that I'm bringing that right energy to everything that we're doing. Because there are always challenges when you're a trailblazer, right? There just are. It's the way it is, you know?
I,
Um,
I agree with you totally. And when you mentioned sometimes you just wake up and you want to have that and do have a feeling of gratitude. And it reminds me of what someone in our industry said that I just love this. So I want to share it. And it is what to have in your head when you're dealing with the multitude of people you deal with. But just always remember, we're all just trying to get picked for the kickball team. And I love that because I don't care how important we think we are or how accomplished we may be or what our age is or what our position is. We're all just trying to get picked, right? For kickball. So that there's an openness of your heart and your head when you think about that. People are doing generally the best that they can, and we should be able to figure out ways to work together, get through things together. And I don't know if that was really relevant to what you
no,
were
it's
talking.
just that's hilarious. No, I was educated recently on some new slang where a 13-year-old and the notion of like the pick me kids, like the
Oh,
ones who want to belong and want to, and I was like, oh girl, that's been going on for a long time. You just relabeled it. But yeah, I mean, it's just a sense of belonging and
right.
inclusion, right? Coming back to that notion that like it's not just about inviting everyone to the party, it's about making everyone feel included. And that is your voice being heard too, and in the right context, which sometimes it does mean you need to reframe in gratitude.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and back to early days, I remember being told you're in a man's job. They won't accept you in the distribution centers. We don't pay women like that in this part of the country, just all those things. And I remember calling my dad and telling him, and I was so mad. And I remember him going, and this was consistent with how he had been my entire life. Okay, you can get all upset, or you could whine, or you could cry, or why don't you go prove them wrong and just go do your job? And so I think that has stuck with me too. It's like, don't let something, I mean, listen to what people say, but then don't let that drag you down or take your energy away from going in and accomplishing what you need to accomplish for the business, for yourself, for the people. And so I think that's important too.
There's there's so much to be said for that. And that is also, I find you lean into all the people who lift you up and restoke up your fire when people do push you down. It does happen. You get beat up on the
Sure.
playground.
Yeah.
Maybe you
Yes.
took a kickball to the face. You made
Uh-huh.
the team, but you just took one to the, line drive to the face. But look, you look around you, your team's like, are you okay? Picks you
Right.
up, dusts you off. And that feeling of support, I think, comes from that place of authenticity and having the humility to ask for the help and to say, yeah, I'll take your hand, pull me up out of this dirt now. Right. um, I want to ask you one last question from the crowd, and this is a bit of a pivot, but I'm going to just go ahead and throw it out here. We're in a time of rapid innovation right now in the restaurant industry. We're seeing way more manufacturing come in. I'm seeing so many different interesting tech solutions pop up here, there, everywhere. You know, we're in an industry that for years, hundreds of years has thrived because it does stuff the same way, right? Whether it's a French kitchen technique or
Right.
it's how we open and close a restaurant. How do you view the balance between this sort of phase, what feels like to be rapid innovation, and this deep sense of culinary tradition that exists not just in the restaurant industry, but in the culinary world as well?
I think that all the advances, technology or otherwise, can actually contribute to consistency of the quality and so forth. And, we talk about changes in artificial intelligence. It's been around, but it certainly is accelerating even more in its applications in retail and in restaurants. But I think, again, back up, be clear about what we're trying to do and see what the opportunities are to help us deliver that consistency when that is important. And I don't mean don't be afraid of it. Well, I do mean don't be afraid of it, but learn, whether that's through webinars, talking to smart people about it, talking to companies who are already using some applications to improve customer service or efficiencies or quality. And so I think it's exciting as we move forward and can help us accomplish goals that we have had for many years around the quality that can be expected and counted on by our customers and our guests.
What do you think about brands that are like super nostalgic that just do the one thing really well? And then all of a sudden you see them jumping on all the trend bagwagons. It's like, you know, pizza
I don't know.
on it, or, you know, it's like crazy stuff. I mean, I think that there's always room for creativity, but where do you get that balance of like what the brand's promises, and then sort of, do you jump on that trend bandwagon? Do you get on that bus, or do you just let it go by you because you do what you do so well?
Oh, I'd probably pilot it or test it, which sounds corporate-y, but I probably would, because again, that mission drift, that moving away. But so the challenge always is, how do you stay relevant and not lose your heritage, provided the heritage is still something that's valued by at least some segment of the population, right? Enough of the segment of the population that you can have a thriving business on it. So I think I don't know, move with caution, but move with your eyes as wide open as you can, and be willing to fail fast. If you test something and it doesn't work, don't keep moving forward and saying, oh, we want it to work, because maybe it's not going to. Because I think heritage does matter. And I think there are many we can look around and say they've stayed true to that. Not that they haven't updated, but they stayed true to it. Olive Garden, and they even sometimes have bad quarters, right? But they've stayed true to who they are. And I think it has worked for them, but they have also updated. So
Yes, we love free salad and breadsticks. No, but yeah, like the Trailblazer mantra should be test, 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 and test some more. If you're not constantly testing, you're not probably pushing hard enough. And I think it's a wonderful place to sort of wrap. We worked in a few audience questions without even realizing it. I really want to thank you, Edna, so much for your time today. And in the theme of education, we want to share with everyone who's on the call today our Navigator program, which is a primary element of our nonprofit, the Full Course Foundation. We will put up a QR code shortly here that will allow you to scan and participate in the Navigator group coaching program and have access to all of our library of materials available at no cost to you for 3 months. And we'll share that up just in a second here. And want to invite anyone who has any questions about how they can get help from their business, whether it's from a leadership development perspective, personal mentorship, or if you need some blocking and tackling help with your business, Full Course is here to help you. You can book a call with us directly anytime on our website. We're also going to share a QR code with you now so that you can book a call with us. It'll take you right over to the website. We want to thank Edna Morris for being with us today and just sharing so much of her wisdom and knowledge with everyone on the call today. I want to remind everyone that Rising Tide is our monthly seminar series. It is provided free through the Full Course Foundation, where we allow mentors, educators, vendors, suppliers, and people in the industry to share their expert level knowledge with you as a community. You can find all of our Rising Tide past and present on our website under our education tab. You can also scan here to get invited to the next Rising Tide episode, which will be in September. I want to thank everyone for being here today, and especially you, Edna, for all of your service to our restaurant community and for spending time with us today. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.